Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. There is something ancient in the green, a pulsing shadow hidden beneath the tides of endless war and ramshackle violence. Something older than the Imperium, older than chaos, older than even the Necron tire's first cries of hatred. The Orks scream, smash, and burn across the stars, wearing their idiocy like armor. But sometimes, just sometimes, they show something else. A glint of purpose. A whisper of forgotten design. A moment of impossible cunning. In those moments, the veil slips, and the galaxy remembers a name that was never meant to be remembered. Krork. The Krork were not beasts. They were weapons made godlike, titans of brutality and brilliance. And as the galaxy groans under the weight of endless war, there are those who wonder if the Orks, the idiot children of ancient design, are beginning to wake up. Not just in strength, but in purpose, in cohesion, in ambition. If that's true, then the nightmare of the war in heaven is not over. It's only beginning again. Long before the Emperor's dream was whispered on Terra, before the gods of chaos knew their names, before the Necron tire sold their souls to the Khitan, there was war. A war so old and vast that it cracked stars and tore time asunder. The war in heaven. And in that war, the Old Ones, master bioengineers and reality-bending deities, crafted a final weapon. Not a machine, not a ship, a species. A force of nature wearing flesh. They called them the Krork. The Krork were not just warriors, they were war personified. Towering, intelligent, terrifyingly disciplined, and nearly unkillable. Designed to resist the necrodermis of the Necrons, to endure the reality-tearing powers of the Khitan, and to function in any environment, the Krork were living war engines. Their minds were sharp, their tactics devastating, and their coordination unlike anything the galaxy has seen since. They were not built for conquest. They were built for containment, for survival. The Krork were the Old Ones' firewall against annihilation. Imagine an orc, but without the stupidity, the randomness, the addiction to slapstick violence. Imagine a being the size of a dreadnought, with the speed of an Astartes and the strategic mind of a Primarch. Imagine a warlord who could not only scream and charge, but orchestrate 10,000 forces across a dozen systems in perfect sync. That was a Krork. They were biologically immortal, self-repairing, and psychically resonant. Like orcs, they functioned better in groups. Like orcs, they could warp reality slightly with collective belief. But unlike orcs, they were not limited by chaos. They could learn, remember, plan, improve. They weren't trapped in endless walks, they mastered them. Their creation was not perfect. Nothing from that era was. The Krork were difficult to control, even for the Old Ones. Some speculate that factions among the Krork began to rebel, to seek purpose beyond servitude. They didn't want to be weapons. They wanted to be kings. And so, when the war in heaven ended in devastation and silence, the Krork did not vanish in fire. They faded. They devolved. Whether by accident, design, or sabotage, their intelligence atrophied. Their coordination collapsed. And what remained were the Orks, a degraded, rabid echo of something once divine. But relics of the Krork remain. Bones too large to be orc. Artifacts that pulse with impossible technology. Ruins deep in the halo stars where ancient battles were fought with armies of green titans who roared in languages no orc remembers. Every once in a while an Archeoxeno vault is unearthed and inside lies the skeleton of a Krork. So massive it has to be mistaken for a long-lost Xenos god. But it's not a god. It's a warning. The Krork were not a mistake. They were a failsafe, and the galaxy, crumbling, fracturing, forgetting, may be activating that failsafe once more. Whether the Orks know it or not, something in their genetic core is ancient. Not primal, not savage, just sleeping. The Krork are not extinct, they are dreaming in green skin. And if that dream stirs, the stars will burn again. When you look at the Orks of the current age, you see madness clothed in muscle. Gleeful brutality. A species addicted to its own violence. From the goth hordes that tear apart worlds with cleavers the size of speeders, to the speed freaks who ride their own shoddy engineering into infernal glory, the Orks are chaos in biological form. But beneath that madness, there's a pattern, however faint, suggesting that the Orks are not merely deteriorated Krork, but something far more tragic. Forgotten gods turned into jokes. Today's Orks are everywhere. Ubiquitous, unkillable, and absurdly adaptable. Drop them on an ice world, and they'll burn snow. Drop them in a hive, and they'll wear it like a hat. But what they don't have, what separates them from their mythic predecessors, is unity. The Krork were unified under purpose. They remembered the enemy. The Orks, they don't even remember breakfast, and if they did, they'd probably headbutt it. Their entire civilization is a fragmented tide of tribes and clans, with no central government, no lasting leadership, and no memory of who they were. The Krork had a sense of military hierarchy, chain of command, possibly even written language. Some theories suggest they could coordinate multi-theater galactic campaigns across light years. Today's Orks, by contrast, rely on the sheer weight of numbers and the telepathic buzz of their collective belief to make their poorly built weapons function. Not because they understand the machines, but because they think they work. Orks don't manufacture, they manifest. It's hilarious and horrifying. They build spaceships with scrap, paint things red to go faster, and shout Daka as a form of both war cry and life philosophy. It would be easy to dismiss them as a degraded species of pure entropy. But this simplicity is itself deceptive. The Orks are not evolving because they have to. They are evolving in spite of themselves. Instances of smarter Orks, strategic warlords, large-scale coordinated wags, and advanced battlefield adaptation are increasing. Ghazghkull is the poster boy for this, but he's not alone. Big mechs are creating increasingly sophisticated war gear. Some Ork war bosses are holding power over multiple star systems for years, not days. There is structure creeping back into the madness, not enough to call it a return to the Krork era, but enough to hear echoes. And then there's the question of their biology. The Orks are a fungal-based species, semi-plant, semi-animal, with distributed DNA programming that allows them to manifest all roles of a society organically. Engineers, doctors, psychers, soldiers. That kind of design doesn't just happen. It was made. Made with a purpose that seems at odds with the species' current state. Why would you engineer an entire ecosystem of violent imbeciles with no long-term goal? Unless that was the point. Unless they were built to last. Not just through war, but through time. A time capsule in the shape of a race. And the further the galaxy spirals into chaos, the more that capsule stirs. Some believe the Orks are the galaxy's cruelest joke. Others believe they are its backup plan. But the contrast is undeniable. The Krork were titans of green order. The Orks are their decayed reflection, still powerful, still unkillable, but hollowed out by forgetting. And perhaps, just perhaps, the joke is ending. Maybe what we see now, the chaotic glee, the laughable savagery, isn't the final form. Maybe it's just the cocoon. Maybe the real punchline is still coming. And it won't be funny. Deep in the genetic code of every Ork lies a riddle written by gods. The old ones, architects of life and war, never played dice with the galaxy. They engineered species with purpose, precision, and long arcs of evolution. The Orks, descendants of the Krork, are no exception. Unlike humans who crawl through adaptation over millennia, the Orks were made to remember forward. Their DNA is not just a record of what they are. It is a blueprint for what they might become. The theory of a genetic time bomb isn't just speculative, it's almost obvious when you begin to notice the strange behavior of Orks across the galaxy. Every Ork, no matter where he sprouts or how far from civilization he is, instinctively knows how to speak Orkish, how to fight, how to repair crude technology, and how to organize into clans. None of them are taught. They are born remembering. This is not evolution. This is design. There is something eerie in that. Orks don't raise their young, they are their young. Every Ork spore contains not just the essence of the species, but the entire cultural memory of it. They don't evolve through adaptation, they evolve through activation. And the terrifying question becomes, what if they have not even begun to activate? Suppose there are dormant genetic protocols written into their very biology, keys that only turn when the galaxy reaches the right crisis point, signals that unlock layers of memory, intelligence, or power. The Orks might not just change, they might revert. Back to what they were. Back to Krork. What could trigger such a shift? Some point to the psychic resonance of the galaxy. The Whack field is more than a tool. It is a mirror. It reflects their belief, their unity, their emotional state. As the Orks gather in greater numbers and engage in larger, more unified wars, that field intensifies. It bends reality itself. It causes weapons to work when they shouldn't, vehicles to drive without fuel, and Orks to survive wounds that should be fatal. But what happens when that field reaches critical mass? Could it function like a planetary awakening, flipping hidden switches buried in their DNA? Then there are other, darker theories. That certain war bosses, like Ghazghkull, aren't just brilliant or lucky, they are partially awakened. Proto-Krork, not fully evolved, but glitching into higher functions. Their rise could be genetic dominoes falling in slow motion, a chain reaction set in motion by the convergence of war, belief, and galactic instability. That would make every new WoG not just a battle, but a birth pang. And there's precedent for this. The Beast, the legendary Ork warlord who nearly shattered the Imperium in M32, exhibited signs of impossible intelligence, ambition, and strategic. He may have been the first accidental Krork, a fluke of genetic misfire, or perhaps a test run. And if so, then what we're seeing now isn't new. It's a second wave. A deeper, broader reactivation. The evolutionary sleeper cell waking up again. This isn't just about biology. It's about destiny. The Orks were not made to be the comic relief of the galaxy. They were made to be its last weapon, the final firewall. A species that cannot be exterminated, that laughs at entropy, that thrives in apocalypse. In an age where chaos grows stronger, the Tyranids consume reality, and the Imperium fractures from within. Maybe, just maybe, the Old One's last trick is about to play its hand. And when it does, the Orks will not change slowly. They will explode into purpose. All that latent potential, that ancient programming will snap into place. The idiot laughter will fall silent. The rusted axes will become tools of empire. The tide of green will no longer swarm randomly across the stars. It will march in step with memory. And the galaxy will finally meet the Krork again. Not as relics, not as myths, but as destiny fulfilled. When you look at Ghazghkull Magruk Thraka, you don't see just another Ork warlord. You see a walking paradox. A creature of immense brutality paired with uncanny charisma. A beast who roars about the gods and destiny, yet commands with tactical brilliance. You see someone who is not supposed to exist. Not in the form we know Orks to take. Because Ghazghkull is something else. Something older. Something that whispers of the Krork in every stomp of his titanic boots. At first glance, he seems like the ultimate expression of Orkdom. Larger than most space marines, clad in megamorph fused into his very flesh, and followed by a whack so massive it shakes the stars. But dig deeper and the truth is far stranger. Ghazghkull is not merely big, he is focused, he has vision. He speaks of a divine purpose, not just conquest. He unifies the fractious Ork tribes, not through fear, but through belief. That's not normal, that's not Orky, that's Krorky. Let's go back to where it began. Ghazghkull's awakening came when a bullet to the head, fired by a human, tore through his skull. Any other Ork would have died, or at best, been reborn dumber. But Ghazghkull came back, changed. Not only was his brain repaired with cybernetics by the pain boy Mad Doc Grotznik, but he began to receive visions, from Gork, or possibly Mork, or both. And these weren't just dreams of carnage, they were strategic revelations. Detailed insights into galactic conflict. Plans, orders, objectives, that is where everything starts to unravel. Because Orks don't get visions, they don't plan campaigns. They don't, as a rule, think in terms beyond the next good scrap. Yet Ghazghkull spoke of holy wars, galactic purposes, and ultimate unity. He didn't just fight for fun, he fought for meaning, and that meaning echoed in every Ork who followed him. His belief amplified their belief, which in turn amplified the WoG field, creating a psychic feedback loop of evolution. Ork psychers around him became stronger, weapons malfunctioned less, his mere presence turned mobs into armies. Some scholars of Xeno's behavior whisper that Ghazghkull's brain is not merely modified, it is reactivated, that the bullet did not damage his mind but dislodged a genetic barrier, a lock. And when it broke, something old began to stir. A slumbering Krork template activated by trauma and technology. What if that fragment of metal did more than wake a warlord? What if it woke a prototype? Because Ghazghkull does not behave like an Ork. He wages war like a tactician. He has taken on space marines and won, outwitted imperial generals, commanded across light years, maintained logistics, repeatedly escaped death, even refused to kill Yarrick when he had the chance. Not out of mercy, but because he respected him. That kind of psychological complexity is unheard of in traditional Ork behavior. He even names his great crusade the Great Wag, a term filled with religious significance, suggesting a sense of destiny. He believes he is doing the will of Gork and Mork, and whether those gods are real, psychic constructs, or ancient Krork memories made manifest, Ghazghkull serves them with terrifying faith. And faith is power among orcs, especially when magnified across billions. There's more. Ghazghkull does not simply conquer, he builds armories, war moons, shipyards. There is infrastructure behind his storm, a growing machine of war that sustains itself. Orcs don't normally do that. They loot and move on. Ghazghkull consolidates. He creates hierarchy, purpose, stability. And stability in the heart of a Wah is not orcish, but it is Krorkish. Even his rivals respect him. Orcs who would normally fight each other for fun fall in line. They don't just fear him, they revere him. They chant his name like a prophet. And what prophet ever rose from fungus and fire to command a civilization? Maybe the better question is, what prophet ever returned? Ghazghkull is not the return of a warlord. He is the return of memory. A silhouette cast by a giant long dead, a Krork skeleton wearing green flesh. If he continues to grow in size, influence, and vision, then he may not just lead a Wah, he may lead a species back to itself. There is a myth among the orcs that war is its own reward. That strategy is for the Humies and Eldar, and that planning more than 5 minutes ahead makes you some kind of weedy git. But the galaxy is changing, and so are the greenskins. The great wogs of today no longer look like the chaotic stampedes of the past. They move with rhythm, purpose, layers of command, and behind it all is a chilling possibility. The orcs aren't just growing stronger, they're remembering how to organize, how to conquer, like they did when they were Krork. In the past, orc warbands were massive, but directionless, turning inward and collapsing as soon as the immediate enemy was crushed. The Imperium learned to weather the storm, not because it could beat the orcs, but because the orcs could never beat themselves. They'd bicker, fight each other, or simply lose interest and wander off. But in recent centuries, especially under war bosses like Ghazghkull, the orcs have begun to display levels of coordination once thought impossible. Take the Armageddon campaigns. Not only did Ghazghkull coordinate multiple invasion fronts with precision, but he also staged feints, withdrew strategically, and returned stronger. That's not just cunning, that's warcraft. Orcs setting ambushes, establishing forward operating bases, and rotating logistics through the warp. This is behavior that implies not just a powerful leader, but a network of understanding, a cast of commanders capable of reading and executing long-term plans. We are seeing orc forces pull off planetary blockades, build siege engines not just out of junk, but with tactical vision, designs that suggest memory, not just improvisation. Armored divisions move in synchronized patterns. Air squadrons coordinate bombing runs. War bosses speak of campaigns, not just battles. And in some sectors, orcs have begun organizing formal ranks and roles, with clear hierarchies and even "Emperor help us" written symbols. This is not simply adaptation, this is reversion. These traits align closely with the scant records we have of the Krork. Massive, unified forces capable of long-term galactic campaigns, held together not just by psychic glue, but by true martial doctrine. The Krork didn't fight for sport, they fought for control. They understood siegecraft, galactic logistics, and enemy psychology. Their weapons were devastating not because of raw power, but because of timing, placement, and scale. These are all things we now see, flickering like old memories in the way the Great Wogs are taking shape. And as orcs fight smarter, they grow more dangerous. Each success reinforces belief. Belief strengthens the Wog field. The Wog field makes their improbable tech more reliable, their tactics more effective, their cohesion stronger. It is an exponential loop of evolution, not one driven by natural selection, but by feedback. The more orcs believe they are a mighty unified force, the more they become one. And the universe is rapidly running out of ways to dismiss it as coincidence. There's also an emotional undercurrent to all this, a strange, tragic beauty. Because the orcs, for all their brutality, were never meant to be savages. They were meant to be protectors, warriors of purpose. The Krork were created to preserve balance, to resist annihilation, to stop the fall of everything. That ancient blueprint is echoing again, perhaps because the galaxy is falling once more. And maybe, just maybe, the orcs are trying to become what they were meant to be, Through war, yes, but through intentional war. The rising sophistication of the Great Wags is not just a threat, it's a story. A species clawing its way back to lost glory through the only language it still speaks. Combat. Each coordinated strike, each held territory, each war council, they are fragments of a long-buried memory struggling to reassemble itself. The Orks don't know they're evolving, but evolution doesn't care if its subject is aware. The process marches on. And at its center, behind the smoke and blood, we begin to glimpse a terrible silhouette. Not of chaos, not of madness, but of strategy. A green hand tightening its grip, not in fury, but in control. The Krork were once the most terrifying army the galaxy had ever seen. What if they're coming back one chain of command at a time? The old ones are long dead, or so we are told. Their civilization, more myth than history, is scattered across the galaxy in shattered ruins, broken gateways, and forgotten biotechnologies. They were gods of biology, sculptors of life, and warriors of desperation. And in their final moments, they did not go quietly. They seeded the stars with weapons, not bombs. Species. The Eldar, the Jokero, and most terrifyingly, the Krork. But what if they left more than just creations? What if they left instructions? There are ruins in the galaxy so ancient even the Necrons speak of them with caution. Planets blackened by time, orbiting dead stars, hiding megastructures that should not exist. Some of these places seem tuned, resonant, not to human psychers or chaos energies, but to Orks. Explorator teams have reported strange electromagnetic activity when Ork spores are nearby. Machines that activate, symbols that glow, systems that seem to wait for something. One such incident occurred in the Gularis Expanse, where a dormant Xenos facility, undisturbed for tens of millions of years, suddenly powered on after Orks settled nearby. No Imperium tech could access its systems, but the Orks, unaware of the miracle, simply started using it. And it worked. The Big Mech called it the Boss Box. Within days, they were producing weapons that fired silence, vehicles that phased through matter. Not because they built them. Because the facility remembered the Krork. Fan theories abound. Some believe these ancient vaults are part of a galactic neural net, a system built by the Old Ones to monitor and guide the Krork across millennia. A failsafe that only awakens when certain psychic thresholds are met. Others think they are memory cores, biological archives meant to reintroduce lost knowledge to the Krork when the time was right. And the time? Maybe now. There are glyphs in some ruins that look eerily like Orkish runes, but more complex, stylized, clean. Like a purer form of the language before it degraded into brutalist scrawl. In one instance, a kill team found a mural deep beneath the sands of Orks 4, showing massive green titans, far larger than any known orc, wearing armor not cobbled from scrap, but engineered with purpose. Their eyes glowed. They were not beasts, they were kings. The implications are horrifying. These vaults are not just archaeological curiosities, they are keys. When Orks cluster in large enough numbers, when the Whack field surges, these keys turn. The memories stored in ancient circuits begin to awaken. The stars align, and the great green machine begins to turn over once more. Some speculate that even the gods of the Orks, Gork and Mork, may not be true deities but personified echoes of the Old Ones' programming. Archetypes imprinted psychically into the Krork mind to guide them. Gork the brutal force, Mork the cunning edge. Not gods, but functions, protocols. The Orks may not worship them, they may be running them. Even more disturbing is the possibility that the Old Ones anticipated this very age, that they knew the galaxy would descend into madness once again, that they planned for the Orks to forget, to degrade, only to awaken at the final hour, a form of biological time delay. A seed that only flowers in apocalypse. What would an Ork who touched these ancient systems become? What knowledge would it inherit? What command would it obey? Could it be possible that the first true Krork rebirth won't come from random evolution, but from activation? And here lies the quiet terror. The Orks don't need to find the Old Ones' vaults. They are the keys. Every spore carries the passcode. Every wach is a password echoing into the void. And the vaults are listening. When enough of them scream in harmony, when the blood flows and the belief boils, the doors will open, the machines will wake, the green will rise, not in chaos, in memory. And when that happens, the Old One's final command will be fulfilled. Finish the war, end the stars, become what you were always meant to be. Krork. In the quiet crypts of stasis beneath dead suns, the Necrons wait. Their minds, ancient and emotionless, process the galaxy's changes and cycles that dwarf human history. They observe, they remember. And there is one memory they cannot forget, no matter how many stars die around them: the Krork. For it was the Krork who bled them. The Krork who resisted the Tan. The Krork who waged war not with magic or hope, but with pure engineered defiance. The Necrons do not fear much. Their armies are logical, their minds immune to panic. But in their databanks are records of titanic battles against green giants that tore through legions of immortals, shattered tomb fortresses, and killed star gods. Not defeated, killed. The Krork did not run from the Tan. They hunted them, smashed them into shards, forced the Necron Tire to watch as their cosmic gods were broken. That is not a memory easily erased. And so, when modern Orks begin to display strange patterns, greater organization, strategic behavior, impossible survivability, the Necrons notice. They analyze, they deploy scouts. Silent observers begin appearing at the fringes of WAGs, not engaging, merely watching. Not out of curiosity, but out of recognition. Something is stirring in the green tides, something the Necrons thought long buried. In some regions, Necron dynasties have taken preemptive actions. Tomb worlds, once silent for millennia, have activated defense protocols not seen since the War in Heaven. Entire planets have been sterilized, not because they are strategic, but because they housed large Ork populations exhibiting proto-Krork behaviors. These weren't invasions, they were containment efforts. The Silent King, most elusive and calculating of all Necron leaders, has altered his trajectories. Cryptic shifts in his vast plan occur only when major WAGs gain traction. Some believe he is beginning to account for a future not dominated by tyrannids or chaos, but by a reborn green juggernaut. He remembers the Krork personally. He fought them, lost to them, survived them, and now he sees their return, not as a possibility, but as an inevitability. Necron cryptechs, masters of technomancy and temporal computation, have begun modeling Krork resurgence scenarios. In some simulations, even a partial return of Krork-level coordination among Orks leads to catastrophic loss projections, not just for Necron forces but for everyone. Because the Krork did not distinguish between enemies, they waged total war, and if their successors awaken, they may not seek conquest, they may seek completion. The final war, encoded into their design, triggered by the decaying state of the galaxy. There are signs the Necrons are looking for Old One relics, not to harness them, but to destroy them. Entire excavations have been obliterated via self-detonating pylons, not out of disrespect for their enemy, but out of terror. The Necrons understand something most races do not. The Krork were not merely weapons. They were Ts, biotech Ts. And the Old Ones hid locks all over the galaxy. Some tombs have even exhibited strange failures, neurological glitches, command interruptions, field errors, when large Ork warbands pass nearby. As if the green psychic field is interfering with Necron systems. That shouldn't be possible. Yet it is happening. The WAC field doesn't just affect reality. It may disrupt technologies older than the Imperium itself. The Krork fought the Necrons not just with fists, but with resistance fields, disruptive energies encoded into their biology. That legacy may still linger in the Orks, dormant, but returning. The most chilling thought of all? The Krork won. The Necrons retreated from them, the Khitan shattered under their fists, and now, after tens of millions of years, the green tide may be rising again, not as a random plague of violence, but as a designed resurgence. A built-in failsafe, reactivating. The Necrons are not afraid, not exactly, but they are preparing, quietly, thoroughly. Their long war has not ended, it was merely paused, and now it resumes. Because when the Krork return, they won't knock on tomb doors. They'll break them open. The Imperium of Man has always underestimated the Orks. To the bureaucrats of Terra and the admirals of Segmentum Command, the green tide is little more than a nuisance, a persistent, brutish infestation, loud, stupid, predictable. Something you kill and move on from. But in that underestimation lies a fatal blind spot. Because while the Imperium focused its dread on the warp, on the Tyrannid hive fleets, on the ancient awakening of Necron tombs, it forgot to look beneath the surface of the loudest threat. It forgot to ask why the Orks never die, why they change. The Orks have always been treated as comic relief by Imperial doctrine. Dangerous, yes, but ultimately simplistic. Their weapons are junk, their ships are barely space-worthy, and their society is a patchwork of violence and grease. That belief is comfortable. It allows commanders to ignore the deeper pattern, to overlook the hints of strategy, the glimmers of intelligence. But the galaxy does not reward complacency, and the Orks are no longer laughing just for fun. They are evolving, and the Imperium isn't ready. Across hundreds of war zones, reports have begun surfacing of Ork behaviors that defy expectations. Warbands that show restraint, sieges conducted with engineering precision, diplomacy, not peacemaking, but strategic ceasefires to allow larger conquests. In some sectors, Orks are even forming alliances of convenience with Chaos Warbands or renegade humans, not for loyalty, but for timing. That kind of thinking is not Orkish, it's tactical. And yet, the High Lords barely notice. The Inquisition remains obsessed with demonic incursions. The Astartes focus on isolated threats. The Administratum churns its endless tide of paperwork and undercounts Ork populations by orders of magnitude. Why? Because the Orks are easy to ignore, easy to belittle, even when they're winning. And they are winning. Every time a WOG ends, it leaves spores behind. Every planet touched by green becomes a ticking time bomb. Whole agri-worlds are quietly shifting under the weight of hidden growth. Hive worlds unknowingly pump Ork spores through their water systems. The Orks don't just fight, they seed. And the Imperium, with its slow, reactive nature, cannot keep up. By the time they notice an Ork resurgence, it's already an invasion. But the most dangerous part of the Imperium's blind spot is this. It has no doctrine for evolution. It sees Orks as static, unchanging, the same threat they were 10,000 years ago. It doesn't account for change, for memory, for awakening. The idea that Orks could become smarter, more coordinated, more strategic is dismissed as heresy or madness. And so, when it happens, the Imperium is always caught flat-footed. Even among the Astartes, those warriors bred for adaptability, there is reluctance to accept the truth. The Orks are displaying behaviors they have not seen since the Beast. War bosses now carry relics that hint at ancient knowledge. Glyphs found in their camps mirror symbols found in forbidden Xenos vaults. Some tech priests whisper of patterns in Ork construction that shouldn't exist. Symmetry, replication, even resonance with pre-imperial frequencies. What's worse, Orks don't need the Imperium to change. They grow despite it, in darkness, in fire. The Imperium's lack of attention is a gift to the green tide. Every overlooked scrap world, every ignored backwater, every minor waft dismissed as contained, is another forge for Krork resurgence. There are those within the Ordo Xenos who are beginning to see it. Radical inquisitors with forbidden texts and genetic records are sounding quiet alarms. They speak of converging signs. Wax lasting longer, Orks communicating across sectors, weird boys accessing deeper layers of the psychic field. But their warnings are buried under the avalanche of crises. There are always more immediate threats, more urgent fires, and so the truth is shelved again. But truth doesn't need attention to grow, it needs time. And the Orks have had millions of years. The Imperium's blind spot is not just a tactical failure, it is a philosophical one. It cannot imagine that the universe's greatest joke might be its oldest weapon. That the green tide might not be random noise, but the slow turning of a forgotten engine. The Krork were made to awaken when the galaxy fractured, and fracture it has. The question is no longer if the Orks are changing, it is whether the Imperium will notice before it's too late. There is a moment in Imperial history that is spoken of in hushed tones, an event so cataclysmic it nearly shattered the Imperium in its prime. The War of the Beast. It wasn't led by a chaos warlord or an alien god. It was led by an Ork, a massive, towering figure so powerful, so coordinated, and so terrifyingly intelligent that even the Adeptus Astartes whispered his name with dread. The Beast. But what if that was not a freak occurrence? What if it was a glimpse, a warning of what lies dormant in the Ork race? The Imperium tries to bury this war under mountains of data and administrative fog. But the truth is too large to ignore. In the 32nd millennium, the Beast rose, not as a lone war boss, but as the centerpiece of a civilization. His Orks built moon-sized war engines, interstellar communication networks, and military formations that rivaled the best of the Imperium. They didn't just fight, they conquered, system by system, with discipline. The Beast was not an Ork, he was something more. Something that spoke with calculated vision, that wielded not just weapons but ideology. He knew who the Imperium was, he understood its weaknesses, he mocked the High Lords, and he nearly broke Terra itself. The only reason he was defeated was because the Imperium was at its strongest. The High Lords had unity, the Astartes were in their prime, the Emperor's light still burned bright, and even then, it took the sacrifice of entire chapters and an act of desperate assassination to stop him. But the question that has haunted scholars and radicals ever since is this: where did he come from? He was too powerful, too advanced, too organized to be just another orc. And the answer may lie in what he was called, not by the Imperium but by his own kin. Da Beast. A title, a role, not a name, as if he was expected, as if he was part of a cycle. There are those who believe he was a Krork, a true, partial rebirth of the ancient weapon race, not fully formed but far closer than anything seen since, a genetic anomaly, or perhaps the first signal of reactivation. A misfire in the old one's buried code. He was not the end, he was the beginning. And what's more terrifying? He didn't emerge from a massive civilization or decades of development. He just appeared, sprouted like all orcs do from spores, but this one came out wrong, or right depending on your point of view. Fully grown, towering, commanding, and the orcs recognized him, instinctively. They fell into line, they followed, as if something in their DNA told them, this is the one. That is not evolution, that is design. The Imperium destroyed him, but they never figured out how he came to be, or why. And now, millennia later, the orcs are stirring again. We see figures like Ghazghkull, Warks, with unprecedented levels of unity, psychic fields intensifying, ancient relics resonating. The galaxy is plunged into chaos once more, just as it did when the beast rose. What if he was the first and the next is coming? The implications are staggering. The War of the Beast may not have been an anomaly, but a test run. A prototype. The genetic code of the Krork, buried in orc biology, triggered once and then fell dormant. But the trigger remains. And if the conditions arise again, enough orcs, enough belief, enough psychic tension, another beast could emerge. Maybe even stronger, smarter, closer to the original Krork template. And this time, the Imperium is not ready. It is fractured, weakened, distracted. The forces that defeated the beast before are scattered or gone. The institutions that protected humanity have rotted under the weight of 10,000 years of stagnation. If the Krork rise again, there may be no imperial fist to stop them. The beast was not just a warning, he was a prophecy. A glimpse into a future the galaxy has forgotten to fear. He showed us that the orcs are not just savages, they are a weapon counting down, a biological time bomb, and the fuse may already be lit. If the next beast rises, he will not be stopped by distraction. He will not be contained by ignorance. He will be the return of memory, the return of order, the return of war with purpose, the return of the Krork. There is a nightmare that lurks at the edge of probability, a vision so vast, so total in its implications, that even the most hardened imperial strategists dare not speak it aloud. It is the thought of a unified orc species, not bound by instinct, not limited by madness, but awakened. The green tide not as a joke, not as chaos, but as an empire, as a singular force of evolutionary destiny. The galaxy would not survive it. For all their rage and numbers, the orcs have always been limited by their own nature. They fight each other as often as they fight the galaxy. They forget, they bicker, they squander victories in drunken infighting and boredom. That's the safety valve. That's the illusion the galaxy relies on. But that illusion is cracking. And what lies beneath is far older, far worse. Imagine the Wag field no longer as a chaotic psychic scream, but as a directed pulse, strategic, calibrated, continuous. Imagine an orc society with memory, with history, with plans. An empire that builds, not just improvises, that returns to its victories to fortify, expand, and govern. A galactic force whose weapons work not because of crude belief, but because they are designed from ancient templates. Imagine the green storm no longer meandering, but converging. Planet by planet, system by system, sector by sector. The Krork were built for such an age. The Krork didn't just fight, they conquered. Their purpose was to stabilize the galaxy through overwhelming martial supremacy. To dominate the stars not out of ambition, but out of biological necessity. They were the firewall of the old ones, programmed with directive imperatives. Detect existential threat, awaken, execute containment. That programming was never removed. It simply slumbered. And as the galaxy tears itself apart through chaos, tyrannids, Necrons, internal rot, that ancient code is beginning to twitch. We are not talking about smarter orcs. We are talking about a species-scale metamorphosis. A psychic singularity where all the splinters of orcish instinct snap into cohesion. Where every warboss, every mech, every weird boy begins pulling in the same direction. Not consciously, but psychically. Not through command, but through resonance. Like tuning forks vibrating to the same frequency across a billion worlds. The signs are already here. Coordinated WAGs spanning subsectors, orc fleets navigating the warp with unprecedented accuracy. Artifacts recovered from battles that suggest technological regression has halted and is now reversing. Some mechs are building devices they shouldn't understand. Some weird boys are channeling powers beyond their control, and the orcs themselves are beginning to speak of visions. Not just of Gork and Mork, but of something more. A third presence, a coming purpose. This is the singularity theory. That the orcs are not just evolving as individuals, but as a species mind. That their psychic field is moving toward a critical threshold, one where individuality gives way to collective destiny. Not a hive mind like the tyrannids, something more terrifying, a martial mind. A union of purpose without the loss of self. A species-wide war council that doesn't need words. In such a scenario, the orcs would not just become more dangerous, they would become inevitable. Attrition would become irrelevant. Every defeat would teach, every loss would shape tactics. Their immortality through spores, their regenerative biology, their exponential psychic amplification, all of it would converge. The WAG field would no longer be a side effect of belief. It would become a weaponized medium, reality-bending force with direction. And when that moment comes, the galaxy will know terror in a new language, because there is no diplomacy, no negotiation, no sabotage. The Krork do not seek peace, they do not tire, they do not forget. And their war is not fueled by hate, it is fueled by design. That makes it pure, that makes it unbreakable. The only thing that has ever held the orcs back is themselves. If that changes, if the final trigger in their DNA is pulled, if the last glyph is unlocked, if the last piece of the psychic puzzle clicks into place, the galaxy will fall. Not in fire, not in madness, but in rhythm. In the synchronized marching of 1 trillion green boots, in the activation of a species made for one thing, to win. That is the green singularity. Not an empire, a conclusion. There is a strange poetry to it all. The orcs, laughed at by every race, dismissed by scholars, hated by generals, and underestimated by the Imperium, may in fact be the final answer to the galaxy's endless spiral into ruin. Not by miracle, not by ascension, but by design. The Krork were built to end wars, not through diplomacy, not through peace, but through supremacy. Brutal, inescapable, green supremacy. And now, after millions of years, that ancient purpose may be stirring once again. The tragedy is not in their violence, but in what was taken from them. The Krork were not mindless brutes. They were engineered titans, cunning, coordinated, unyielding. But when the war in heaven ended, so did their purpose. They collapsed into entropy, into orcs. Into memoryless weapons wandering a galaxy that had already forgotten them, and yet the code remained, buried in bone and spore, sleeping in every chortle, every roar, every wah that sounded across the void. But the sleep is ending. Look at the signs. Ghazghkull's visions, the beast's ancient echo, the rising intelligence among warbands, the arcane precision of some new mechs, the convergence of belief, the quiet panic among Necron lords, the silence of chaos where the green grows thickest. These are not isolated phenomena. They are parts of a larger awakening, the ticking of a cosmic clock. And perhaps the most haunting question is not how, but why. Why now? Why this age? Because the galaxy is dying. The Imperium is fractured. The Eldar are ghosts, the Tau are children, the Necrons are old and bitter, the Tyrannids are hungry, chaos is louder than ever. And through it all, the orcs laugh. Not in ignorance, but in inevitability. The Old Ones knew this age would come, an age of unraveling, of decay, and so they left behind the Krork, the final firewall, the Forgotten Sentinels, warriors built not to save the galaxy but to dominate it until it couldn't fall apart anymore. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the orcs aren't here to restore anything, maybe they're here to replace it all, to become the new order. A brutal, simplistic order, yes, but a stable one. No gods, no heresies, no bureaucracy, just war. Glorious, eternal, joyful war. And in that war, peace through purpose. It's not justice, it's not hope, but it's something lasting. And maybe that's what makes them beautiful. In a galaxy of lies and masks and rot, the Orks are honest. They don't pretend, they don't corrupt. They are. And that might be the purest legacy the Old Ones ever left behind. A species that cannot be stopped, because it doesn't want anything but what it already is. So when you see an Ork, don't laugh. Look closely. Look into his eyes. Ask yourself if what you're seeing is just a monster, or a god wearing a monster's skin, not yet awake. Because the Krork may be returning, and when they do, they won't announce themselves with banners or declarations. They'll come with stompin' boots. With clever mechs, with weird boys muttering in ancient tongues, with war not just loud, but strategic. And when that time comes, you'll know. The galaxy is full of bones. Ancient, forgotten, half-buried truths. And among those bones lies a story no race wants to tell. The story of what the Orks used to be. There are few who dare to speak of it, and even fewer who survive when they do. But deep in the warp-bleached silence between stars, the echoes persist. Not just in data logs or ruins, but in actions, in instincts, in the way certain Orks move when they shouldn't know how, in the symbols they scrawl that match no known glyphs but match each other perfectly, sector to sector, in a pattern that's emerging like a ghost in the static. This isn't fan fiction, it's a pulse. And at the heart of it is a terrifying theory. That there's a class of Orks awakening across the galaxy, intermediaries. Not fully Krork, but not fully Ork either. Something in between. Warlords, mechs, and even weird boys who exhibit behaviors no Ork should possess. Long-term memory, symbolic logic, non-instinctive speech. Not just mimicry, but genuine language evolution. And more chilling than any of it, coordination across vast distances without warp communication. These aren't just smarter Orks. They're pre-conscious nodes. The idea is rooted in an old forbidden text, the Scargill fragment, once sealed by the Ordo Xenos, now lost. It spoke of signal Orks, individuals who begin to shift not just in intelligence but in psychic signature. They vibrate differently in the whack field, not louder, clearer, like tuning forks struck just before a song begins. They often emerge in isolated war zones, seemingly unremarkable at first. A boy with strange glyphs on his skin. A mech who builds machines before he even knows what they do. A weird boy who sees enemy movements days in advance and corrects fleet trajectories accordingly. Most are killed before anyone notices, but some live. In the Golgotha Convergence, 6 separate Ork tribes who had never met, speaking different dialects and worshipping different aspects of Gork and Mork, suddenly unified under a warboss named Ghazghkull. Ghazghkull was average in size, not particularly brutal, not even all that loud, but he spoke in a way no Ork should, calmly, repeatedly. And he drew maps, not crude battle plans, but star charts, strategic webs. He coordinated strikes with surgical precision, and when captured by the Inquisition, he said only one thing: "This ain't the end, dis a tune-up." He died laughing. 2 weeks later, his spores bloomed across 7 planets, all at once. Orks don't do that. These signal Orks, call them proto-Krork if the term fits, are not generals. They're catalysts. They don't lead in the Ork sense. They shape. Like ancient neurons reawakening in a damaged brain, they begin to reconnect scattered pieces of something much, much older. A racial memory so deep, so foundational that it doesn't need words to communicate, only proximity. And the larger the Ork population, the more likely one of these intermediaries will appear. Not by chance, but by design. They're not born, they're triggered. And here lies the most disturbing truth. They don't know what they are. Most believe themselves to be blessed by Gork or Mork, or simply the biggest brain around. But their dreams speak otherwise. Some mutter in their sleep, others draw spirals over and over. There are even reports of Orks entering comatose states for days, only to awaken speaking of battles that haven't happened yet. Names of planets that don't exist, yet. And when those names are traced, they correspond to gravitic anomalies, to warp flux, to future events. What we are seeing is not spontaneous mutation, it's a psychic pattern forming across the species. The Krork were never meant to be static, they were built to adapt, to rebuild. The Orks, despite their madness, are still carrying out that ancient program. And these intermediaries are the interface. They are the instruction set being activated in stages. It's no coincidence that their numbers are increasing as the galaxy's chaos accelerates. The psychic temperature is rising. More wars, more belief, more green. The whack field is thickening like atmosphere before a storm. And in that pressure, certain nodes light up. Not randomly, precisely, as if directed. But directed by what? It might be the whack field itself, evolving into a kind of semi-conscious orchestration. Or it might be something even older. Deep encoded behavioral scripts left by the old ones to activate under specific galactic conditions. Either way, the result is the same. The intermediaries appear. They shift behaviors in their surroundings. Orks become more focused, more efficient. Not less brutal, but more directed in their brutality. It is not evolution through improvement. It is evolution through remembrance. In one instance, an orc painboy named Ghazghkull, previously known only for eating his own tools, suddenly created a tri-chambered psychic stabilization harness. Without schematics, without trial, it worked perfectly. When questioned, violently, he claimed, "Something told me." Not a voice, a pressure, a compulsion. He didn't survive long, but his machines now appear in multiple war zones, replicated by orcs who swear they never saw them before. Something is waking, not as a tidal wave, but as 1,000 green sparks across the stars. These intermediaries are not the Krork, but they are the heralds, the green apostles. And when their numbers grow too large, when the Wah field hits critical mass, they will do what all nodes do: connect. And when they do, the orcs will stop being many. They will become one. One war, one rhythm, one memory reawakened. And the galaxy will finally understand that the Krork never left. They just forgot who they were. Until now. The orcs do not pray. Not in the way humans do. They don't build temples, compose hymns, or whisper desperate pleas into the darkness. Their gods are not distant or silent. They're real, alive, roaring with laughter in every brawl, every explosion, every rising whack. Gork and Mork are not metaphors. They are the orcs' truth. And yet, across a growing number of battlefields, there is something new in their shouts. Something between the names of Gork and Mork. Something deeper, older, unspoken. It is not a name. It is a feeling. Some weird boys have started convulsing not from whack overload, but from something subtler, like tuning to a frequency that hasn't sounded in millennia. They speak in riddles, often contradicting themselves, drawing symbols that don't align with known glyphs of Gork or Mork. When pressed or tortured, they say strange things. He's coming back, but he ain't who we think. Or, we's dreaming him into being, but he's already here. These aren't the usual ravings of overloaded psychers. These are messages. They're talking about a presence, not a third god, not exactly, but a shape forming in the whack field, a convergence. The shape of something remembered. It doesn't demand worship, it doesn't punish disbelief, it waits. And that waiting is doing something to the orcs, not by command, but by resonance, like ripples in a pond becoming waves. This spiritual metamorphosis is unprecedented. Orcs have always been religious in a way that humans misunderstand. Their belief manifests reality. Their gods do not need to be omniscient or omnipotent. They need only be believed in strongly enough. That belief makes the impossible real. So what happens when that belief begins to crystallize, not just into gods, but into self-awareness, into memory? Some clans have reported the spontaneous appearance of new rituals, dances, chants, formations not seen before, or at least not remembered. But when collected, they align with ancient carvings found on pre-imperial ruins. On worlds thought barren since the war in heaven. The glyphs match. The rhythm matches. Orcs are remembering ceremonies they never learned. Psychic behaviors passed not through culture but through code. One warband, the Ghazghkulls, constructed a massive stone totem during a campaign on the world of Tyros Prime. They said it came to him in their dreams. When completed, it resembled no known orc artifact. It was elegant, geometric, and it glowed with a faint green aura visible only to psychers. A captured navigator exposed to it reported hearing chanting in his mind, a deep droning language that bent light. He died hours later, but his final words were recorded. The green one has no name, but he is everywhere. He remembers us. We are in his dream. The ecclesiarchy would call it heresy. The mechanicus would call it anomaly. But to the orcs, it is simply the next step. They are not consciously shifting their spirituality. They are not abandoning Gork and Mork. They are fulfilling them. Because maybe, just maybe, Gork and Mork are not entities. They are aspects. psychological masks worn by a deeper presence that is only now awakening. The Krork may not just be returning as warlords, but as theological centers. The divine made green flesh, not because of faith, but because of design. And that design was always recursive. The Krork were not just warriors, they were myths waiting to be reborn. Their spirituality was not tacked on by evolution, but woven into their function. It is possible that what we call Orkish religion is a compression format, a way to preserve ancient purpose across eons of degradation. Gork and Mork, with all their contradictions, may be metaphors for a duality that once defined Krork society: brute force and cunning precision, two halves of a perfect war machine, the spiritual dialectic of conquest. But what if the dialectic is resolving? Some weird boys speak now of a Gorka Morka, not as a dual being, but as a singular fusion. A god of total war, neither purely cunning nor purely brutal, but balanced, a center, a whole. They say he waits behind the moons or in the bones of the big uns. This is not standard Orkish theology. This is a mythos evolving in real time, guided by a psychic field thickening with each campaign, each death, each shared belief. If this trend continues, we are not merely facing the rebirth of Krork biology, we are facing the rebirth of a Krork god form. An apex psychic construct built not from divinity, but from collective memory and martial intent. A god not born of chaos or the warp, but from an ancient code fulfilling its final directive: create belief strong enough to overwrite reality. It won't be a god in the human sense. It won't care for worship. It will care only for completion, for convergence, for the full reactivation of Krork across all Orkind, body and mind. And it may already be beginning. A handful of Imperial psychers exposed to high-concentration Ork battlefields have reported green shadows in their vision, after images of titanic forms not present in the material world. These are not daemons. They are not warp ghosts. They are psychic projections, fragments of belief coalescing into shapes. Shapes the Orks may not see themselves, but feel, fight for, die for, and be reborn through. The Orks are not just becoming more strategic. They are becoming religious in the old sense, not through doctrine, through memory. And when that memory coalesces, it will not be a god looking down. It will be a species looking in and finally recognizing itself. Krork. Holy. Horrifying. Unstoppable. If you've enjoyed this dive into the hidden heart of the Orks and their terrifying potential, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more Warhammer 40k lore, fan theories, and long-form analysis. There's so much more to uncover. One warcry at a time.